Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Upbuild Conversations. I'm Michael Sloyer, and I'm here with our partners at Upbuild, Prasada and Rasanath. It's a real pleasure to be in this space with you guys from across the world. And today we're going to be speaking about a topic that can sometimes be a little bit uncomfortable depending on how personal we're willing to go and how deep we're willing to dig. And that is the controlling levels of consciousness within the Enneagram framework. So to get us started, maybe Rasanath, you could give us a little bit of an introduction on what the controlling level of consciousness actually is.
Thank you, Michael, and excited to dive into this topic because this is the crux of the work that we do. Even as we use the Enneagram as a tool, it is all about understanding how we show up and what consciousness do we show up, even as our own types. So this is for Prasada and I, and in general at Upbuild, this is a topic very, very close to our hearts. The levels of consciousness are essentially, or is essentially, the vertical dimension of the Enneagram framework, where it is not just about what type you are, but how healthy are you in your own type. And when we talk about health, it is essentially the degree of awareness that you bring to the shadows and the insecurities, the unconscious motivations of your own type. The more healthy we are, and at Upbuild we call the healthiest when we show up with a very strong sense of awareness. We call that as the creative levels of consciousness. And the idea of creative is that there's just so much openness and awareness that even in the most difficult situations, we can see all the options that are available in front of us and choose to act on those options that are beneficial for everyone around us and ourselves. And at the creative levels of consciousness, so one of the things that we have found in our work is there's such a deep desire for everyone to be in the creative levels of consciousness that we miss the point that creative levels of consciousness doesn't mean that things are rosy, that we never make mistakes, or we don't see our shadows show up. It's just that at the creative levels of consciousness, sometimes we are very acutely aware of how our shadows are showing up. And that experience is it's not a good experience from a point of view of being able to see everything that we are bringing into our decision, our life, our conversations, our relationships. And at the same time, that awareness of the shadows that we are bringing in is the starting point for becoming free of them. So at the creative levels of consciousness, we will see that it's not easy, but it's powerful because we can see the distinction between the purer, brighter self versus the darker shadow self. In the control,
I was just thinking, not only is it sometimes the experience in the creative consciousness that we experience our shadows and our controlling tendencies, but that actually defines it for us. That's really how we define the creative consciousness, is that I do see it. Whereas in the controlling consciousness, we don't really see it so much, or we see it, but we try to shove it under the rug, or we create another story to justify it, if we see it at all, right? At the creative consciousness, there's so much openness, there's so much awareness that we see it and it bothers us. So it's not a happy experience, but it is an important one, a meaningful one, and one that produces more fulfillment and hopefully, ultimately, happiness all around.
And I think this is what's so tough, because our conditioning is such, and our society is such, our education system is such that we feel like we're not actually supposed to see those things, because if we see those things, then we're giving them a name, then we're admitting to them. And if we do that, then we're giving them power over us. But it's actually the exact opposite. But we really have to be so cognizant and aware, and also inspired by others around us in order to come to that realization.
Yes, and frankly, positive psychology has not helped on that front. Positive psychology is great in many ways, but it can be confusing, and self-help and all of this, like, pump up work of like, you're great, you're amazing, you're so wonderful. For us, we would say that shackles us to the ego. At Upbuild, we consider that actually dangerous. And again, this is not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's so many wonderful things that come out. There's so many principles that can be extracted from the typical, what you'll see as self-help, and which is, the best-selling section of any bookstore is the self-help. There's a reason for it. It is helping, but we just have to be so aware of the other side of it. And as you said, Michael, it's not our natural inclination to want to talk about the things that are upsetting. We want, like with social media, we want to post the things that are good and let everybody admire and feel good about how fulfilling our lives are. But it's like not even scratching the surface of what reality is. It's painting a picture that is wishful. Taking a slice of reality and making that the truth. Rasanath, you were going to say.
Well, I was just thinking how at the creative levels of consciousness, so many of the emotions that we in society say are negative emotions that shouldn't exist, like shame, like guilt, we actually become very acutely aware of those feelings that exist, and situations that have brought them up. And the most important thing here is also understanding, well, what are they actually pointing to, in a very grounded way. And that's why it can be confronting, perhaps even very uncomfortable, because emotions like guilt and shame are not easy to hold and grow through. We are taught how to not feel, but that's the honest fact is that whether we consciously feel or don't feel, those feelings exist underneath. And what is so dangerous and risky about life is when those emotions essentially go underground. They're like spies in the system. Like they are running the show because they have gone so deep that we are not necessarily aware of them, and we think we don't have them. But they are pulling the strings. And in the creative levels of consciousness, that's those things actually come to the fore. We see what's really happening. We see those emotions of guilt, shame, rage, sadness, and also see the why behind it. And many times the why is not just, actually all the time, the why is just not outside circumstances. It's also things that we carry. And how do we need to take responsibility for what we carry is what the creative levels of consciousness is all about. And we at Upbuild do believe, through our experience personally and through also the work that we have done and continue to do, that a lot of the growth actually happens in the zone when we are moving from the controlling into the creative, and then going up into the creative.
That's why this is so critical, this subject, because this is really where the rubber hits the road. This is where the growth happens. It's going from controlling into creative and staying in creative by seeing the controlling tendencies.
And what also changes at that point is the willingness to take responsibility. Relentless responsibility is the word that I use, which is why, again, that level of consciousness is uncomfortable, because you can't just put your life on autopilot. And at the creative levels of consciousness, you have made the choice not to do that anymore, which means you have to be acutely aware and then constantly take responsibility for everything that we carry. So it's not, it doesn't feel comfortable, but it's tremendously powerful. And over time, when we learn how to live a life in that zone, we begin to see how our decisions, our actions, our conversations, our relationships, um, they go so much deeper. They're so much more fulfilling. They're so much more authentic and honest. And over time, over time, there, there comes a joy in that struggle because I see what it's doing to me. I see how it's bringing out the best. It's actually unlocking the potential that was for so long, was actually kept locked away in the controlling levels of consciousness.
Yeah. So today I was actually going for a run, and I had kind of like a flashback to something that had happened about 2 years ago when I was working as a trader at an investment bank, and we were working on this big trade, and there was a salesperson who was based in London, and he and I had been very close over the years. I had been out there to see him a bunch of times, and we had gone traveling to see some of his clients. So we were actually really close, and we were working on this trade, and he, the client wanted to do the trade. And so he and I had this conversation before we agreed to it to make sure that we were going to be the only ones doing it and that no other banks would actually be involved, which would allow me to neutralize my risk a little bit easier than if other banks were also involved. And so I made him basically swear to me that he knew that his client wasn't going to trade with anybody else. And so we ended up doing the trade. And the next morning when I got to the office, which was actually in the middle of the night, his time, some things started happening where it just made me think, and I didn't have any proof of this. It just made me think that the client had actually traded with other people. And I remember calling him, and I knew it was the middle of his night. I woke him up, and I just kind of started yelling at him, like it was really like rage. And I feel so ashamed now, actually thinking about it. And when I was on my run today, I just felt it was like a flashback of a very traumatic event. But as I'm thinking about it now, and as you were just talking, Rasanath, what I'm realizing is like, I felt so much shame about potentially losing money on this trade, not only because my boss was going to possibly be angry with me that I was losing money, but also like that I had put in a lot of time and that this time felt wasted. Like I had inefficiently used my time, because if I just had not done the trade, I wouldn't have lost the money. And so for both of those reasons, to cover up that shame, I felt extreme anger and rage, and I let it all out on him. And I was able to apologize maybe a month later after the event, and things got a little bit better, but I don't think our relationship has ever been the same since. And, that was definitely a very clear example of being in the controlling, maybe even the destructive level of consciousness.
That's poignant. Thanks a lot for sharing that. Yeah, I understand.
It's very striking to also see how many times when we do apologize, and this has been my own personal experience with apologies too, that apologies can also be in the creative, in the controlling levels of consciousness. I haven't really seen apologies at the destructive level. They can be. I think they can.
It can be. It just looks like you better freaking apologize too, you bastard.
But apologies at the controlling levels of consciousness is also coming from a place of shame, perhaps, where it's like, well, I need to apologize to actually set everything right in this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times apologies can be cosmetic. And while the apology is coming from a place, well, I don't want our relationship to change, which is a very sincere feeling. the depth of the apology, where when we actually take full responsibility for what we did, and actually show the other person, well, this is where it came from, with no defensiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps also not expecting the relationship or that person to actually even forgive. The quality of that apology is again, that is the apology of the creative levels of consciousness.
That's like the highest level of the creative consciousness. Apologize.
And so just to draw out the distinction and quality even with an apology, where apology is ultimately taking responsibility, and what I have found in my own self is there are half-hearted apologies, or there are apologies that are strategic. There are apologies that are for the sake of feeling better about myself. There are apologies for justification. And while on the surface they may look like apologies, they may look like something that's in the creative levels of consciousness, we can have a lot of those apologies still functioning at the controlling levels of consciousness. But at the creative levels, the quality of the apology is very different. It doesn't expect, and again, it takes full responsibility, and it's vulnerable. There is a feeling of like, well, I am showing the other person what really happened, and I want the other person to know what really happened. That's the degree of honesty.
It's also
thank you.
Sorry.
No, thank you for pointing that out. And even as I'm thinking now, which is 2 years later, there's still some aspect of like, oh yeah, that's just part of the business. So like you can forgive my behavior, I can forgive my behavior, because that's just like how things work. And everyone loses their emotions every once in a while. But like we should be up to something bigger. Like it's not just part of the business. Like we're human beings and we have a limited amount of time on this planet, and we need to treat each other with the utmost respect and care and appreciation. And even if there was a mistake that happened during that instance, it's still completely unforgivable. What the behavior was. And so yeah, I can still see how I'm not fully taking responsibility for it.
I was actually it was actually less about how you probably took responsibility for it. It was more about just me thinking about many times when I've apologized in my own life, and to be honest, I'm seeing more of my own. I have had apologies where I have felt morally superior to the other person. And I apologize because I think, hey, I am better than you anyways, so I'm going to give an apology and let's put this to close. And I've seen that in myself. Like it's, and I see more of that, and it's disconcerting. And this is all about past events, past incidents in my own life. And I was reflecting upon that as you were sharing your own, apology after a month, that I can continue to iterate on those apologies more and more, and take more and more responsibility.
It's interesting because you got me thinking about the destructive, can you apologize in the destructive state? And I gave one example of how that looks. I also see how it can look differently, where it's basically in the destructive state, you can apologize where you are boiling with rage and you're just biting your teeth because there's so much moral superiority or so much necessity to just move on, give in. And it's like you're exploding, but you're apologizing to pacify. The other way it can happen is that you're so shut down, you feel like such a victim that you just like give in from that vantage point, or that you feel so, so low, no self-esteem, so absolutely worthless, that you apologize and you take responsibility for things that just perpetuate a cycle of abuse, right? So there are many ways that we can engage in apologizing at each of these levels of consciousness. And I was actually seeing in myself how sometimes I've apologized in the destructive state. And the interesting thing is, sometimes that's just destructive, because like I'm so angry and I'm apologizing and it completely defeats the purpose. Other times it's pretty nuanced. It's not black and white. Other times, at least I apologized. I was in the destructive state, but at least I apologized. That moved something forward. That got me a little closer to controlling. So these things are fluid and nuanced, and there's a lot of intentionality that needs to be there to really navigate these levels of consciousness successfully. And I was also just thinking about how the controlling consciousness, we're talking about controlling consciousness today, how that's all about, literally having control. It's all about things being within my comfort zone, within my sphere, that makes me feel good about myself. It's my ego in control. And I do it in so many different ways. I can even do it by apologizing, right? It's just, the whole point is, I need to feel like I am myself in the way that I see myself, not in the way that I actually am, but my ego self, or the identity of who I think I should be. And I need you to validate that. I need you to make me feel like, yeah, I'm that. So it comes in all different forms, in all circumstances. These levels of consciousness are applicable in every single circumstance. It's incredible.
The classic apology, I'm sorry that you made the mistake. It not only shifts the blame to the other person, so you feel a little bit more in control, but also, as you spoke about earlier, Rasanath, it gives you that moral superiority feeling because you're apologizing. And so the ego is very tricky. It can be really sort of, creative, in a very different word, in terms of getting what it wants.
Yeah, not creative consciousness, but creative in terms of resourcefulness to control.
You could say the ego is more creative in the controlling levels of consciousness, paradoxically. But the other thing with moral superiority that was just coming to mind around the apology piece that I saw in myself, and I continue to see it, is the other person needed it.
Yes. Yeah.
So here I am, so gracious. Even as I have been right, I am taking, that's the kind of responsibility that's easier to take because it stands on moral superiority. It's so interesting and so nuanced that, oh yeah, I'll take the responsibility for this because the other person needs it, and look at how gracious I am. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the creative levels of consciousness, the taking responsibility, it doesn't feel good because you actually see where you stand. You actually see the things that you are bringing, and it just doesn't feel good. And yet that the only way to move forward through all of this is by owning it and saying, hey, it's mine and I need to work on it. And the apologies that come from that place is characteristically very different.
I believe it's Neil Donald Walsh who says life begins at the end of your comfort zone, right? It's a kind of popular saying, but there's a lot of truth to that. And I think it can serve as a good measure of success here for how am I doing with my controlling tendencies? How can I be in the creative consciousness by managing my controlling tendencies? If I'm in my comfort zone, something might be off. I should really examine that. it doesn't necessarily, I mean, we need some comfort, right? It's not to say that this is an absolute, but it is very likely that we're not seeing something if we're in a comfortable state. Really, growth is never comfortable. I mean, we can't emphasize this enough. You have to tear muscle to build muscle. And so there's always that sense of tear, which is intense. But when we develop positive associations with that, like when working out, you start to recognize, oh, that pain, that's a good feeling. Even though it doesn't feel good, it's a good feeling because I've created a positive association that I'm building the muscle. I'm doing what my body needs to be better. So similarly with our controlling consciousness, we should see, when am I in my comfort zone? Where is it that I need to edge out? And just as you were giving with the example of apologizing, Rasanath, if I'm feeling really comfortable in my apology, that's probably a signal. And that applies much broader than just apologizing, again, to every sphere of my life. If I'm kind of surfing the comfort zone, there's likely something that needs to shift if I really want to grow.
I have also apologized and felt that my apology is unfair to me, but I'm just going to do it anyways.
I'm going to be the bigger person, right? Talk about the moral superiority. I know it very well for myself.
It's yeah. Now when I look back and see how many times I've done that in my life, it just doesn't feel good.
I love this. You know, I'm going to be the bigger person because that literally comes into my mind, and it's perfect because it's such a vivid understanding of the ego in that expression. I'm going to be the bigger person. That means that I am going to be better than you. That's the ego.
Yeah. And it also gives, sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking about other things besides apologies where, you know, I am more than you in whatever. And one of those things is competency or value, at least as it plays out for me personally. And so I can just think of so many examples where I've literally shifted the goalposts on what is valuable or what would be a good outcome here in order to fit the paradigm that I am better than or as valuable as somebody else. So I remember in one of our workshops, one of our mini workshops, I didn't get to contribute as much as I would have liked to. I didn't get to speak as much as I would have liked to. But I remember shifting the goalposts in my mind. It was like a great workshop. And I remember shifting the goalposts in my mind afterwards, thinking about like how I had contributed before the workshop started by thinking about what the topic might be, or just in other ways that were sort of, you know, not like on the stage type of ways. And it made myself feel better. But the problem was it wasn't really grounded in reality. It wasn't really grounded in intention or looking at things like very objectively. It was just based on my own ego to make myself feel better.
Oh yeah, I know it well.
Yeah, so many. The ego is always showing up, and that's why this work is so critical. When we say, "Well, I want to be myself," so yesterday I was on a bunch of coaching sessions, and one coaching session, you know, something similar actually came up, and you know, I had to ask the question, so what self are you talking about when you say I can be myself? And it's a question that really stops people in their tracks.
It is the question. That is the question of questions. Yeah.
And then through the course of the conversation, it actually became clear how, in order for the ego to be its full self, somebody else has to pay a price for it. And that is in some ways the controlling levels of consciousness. The controlling levels of consciousness is other people pay the price for the ego to feel like itself.
Yep.
So when many times we do use the phrase, well, I just can't be myself. It's important to ask the question, well, what self am I really talking about here? And what does that self actually really want? And how many people have to make space for that self?
Yeah.
This, can I share one more thing?
Please, of course.
And characteristically, now in a room, if you have all of these kinds of selves, or this definition of selves, where in order for me to be myself, somebody has to be a lesser self, we are, one, in the controlling levels of consciousness, and number two, we are in a conflict zone. That is the reason for a conflict.
That's the hallmark, is what you just said, that somebody has to be lesser than me. The problem is we don't catch it because it's so subtle. You know, we have these ideas about ourselves. No, I'm a good person. I would never want somebody to be less than me. I don't compete. I don't like make people feel small. I want everybody to be happy and good. We don't see the ways in which our ego does this in spite of our would-be good intentions, because we're not aware enough of the subtle ways that we're controlling all the time, and that the ego runs the show. And it runs the show because we don't see it. If we saw it, we would rein it in, and we would be humble, and we would actually be in the creative consciousness rather than wishfully in the creative consciousness, thinking, yeah, I'm good, I'm good, I don't have those things. You know, I have problems, of course, every human being has problems, but like, my problems look like this. It's not that bad, you know. And what you were inspiring me to think about, Rasanath, was this idea of space, and like, is there enough space for everybody? And I think there's again so much talk about scarcity mentality versus abundance mentality, which I think is a helpful way of looking at things also. And here you see it. The ego creates scarcity because the ego is all about I, me, mine. And that takes up the whole room. That takes up the whole world. I'm the star of the movie, and you are all the supporting actors. And if you don't act as support, well, there's going to be trouble, right? And the creative consciousness, on the contrary, is that I want everybody to be the star. And I'm not really concerned about whether I'm a star or not. I recognize that I am myself. And when I'm myself, that's what counts. Like, I don't need to be elevated to some vision of success or how people see me as wonderful, loving, caring, this, that. What I care about is that I'm being true to who I am. And that is enough. And that creates space for everybody else, and it uplifts everybody else. And talk about servant leadership, right? Servant leadership is this principle that I am here simply to elevate others. I'm here to serve everybody else. That is an elevated state, but I'm not doing it because I want to elevate myself. I'm not doing it because servant leadership is now liked by society. Now we teach about this, and you know, so it's a good thing to do. And then I'll really be a great leader. No, the idea is I do this because it's right, because I love doing the right thing. I love to be who I am, and it feels so good to actually just serve people without strings attached, truly from my heart.
And I was just reflecting, Hari Prasad, when you said that. It's the striving to do that, because many times the ego does show up. And the practice,
yes.
The practice and the idea of relentless responsibility lies in the striving. It's despite the urge. It's easy when we don't have the urge to be the star. It's difficult when we do have the urge to be the star, and despite that, then we actually choose. And that's to me, one of the things that I've discovered in this model is suddenly you realize that you have the power to make that choice. And that is freedom. And that is the real experience of freedom. Now I'm not run by my urges. Is it comfortable? No. But when I can make that choice, it's freeing. And when I make that choice once, and I make it twice, and I make it thrice, it starts to get more and more freeing. And that's when we start to see the crack of what actual freedom from the ego looks like. Well, we're still not free from the ego, but you see the sunlight through the crack. And hopefully one day when we are free from the ego, then we can live in that space of freedom all the time.
As you were just sharing, like I got some goosebumps. Like I got a little bit of a feeling of being high. And we were talking about this before we came on the recording, which was, and Hari, you mentioned earlier that growth is not supposed to feel good. It actually generally feels bad, but there can be moments of glory in it. There can be moments of feeling like really positive because of this freedom that you just spoke about, Rasanath, because it's like, oh my God, I don't have to be the star. Like I've been living my whole life thinking that I had to be the star. This is incredible. I have this realization that I don't have to be the star, and there's just a lot less pressure and a lot less severity and gravity to my life, and it feels good. And it also feels bad because I realize that I've been doing this and hurting people my whole life by acting like it. But for that moment of goodness, that is something that we can hold on to and, try to even go for more as we kind of continue to peel the layers of the ego.
Absolutely.
That is it. That is it. I also would just say, for everybody, being the star looks different. Like, if you look at the Enneagram and the 9 different personality types, it's vastly different amongst different types. The 9 on the Enneagram, the peace seeker, they're like, what do you mean being the star? I always want to get away from the limelight. I hate it. I can't stand it. What do you mean I want to be the star? Well, what it means is you want to be the most peaceful person, and you want everybody to make you peaceful and to conform to your view of how everything should be run as peaceful, right? And don't bother me. Don't get in my way. Be the way I want you to be. If there are problems, deal with it, right? Like, so just to give a little example of how this is, again, so subtle and nuanced. As soon as we think it's one way and we limit it to that, we miss so much. So the idea of being the star is universal and critical. And we need to search for what that means for each of us. How is it that I'm the center of my universe? How is it that I'm asking other people to conform to me? And absolutely, there is so much glory and inspiration and joy when I discover these things and I start to at least get on the path of moving beyond them. Even being on that path, and as you said, Rasanath, it's about the striving, because the results are not up to us. It's not that I get to be like, oh, done with my ego, good, awesome, great job. No, the results are not up to us. We can only try our very best and seek as much help as possible, humbly owning things, asking people, can you help me with this? And then the results hopefully will come. And we recognize it's so much beyond us. I mean, we're very prayerful about our path of growth because of how difficult it is. And the celebrations come from our efforts and also from the fact that results came when we can't explain it, when it wasn't like, oh my God, I did this, I did A and B happened. Some of the celebrations are, I did A and in spite of it, B happened. That's amazing. That's so beautiful. And we need that inspiration. We need that hope. We need that confidence and the sense of being in touch with glory that is not about us, but about how wonderful it is to really serve others and try our best.
Thank you. I was thinking as you both were sharing about the sense of freedom, and the true power of being able to make a choice. How in my own life, I have seen how when I have been able to make those choices, I have had this rush, right, where it's like, okay, now I'm free. And I feel good about, like, okay, I have done it, right? That's again the risk. Now what happens is you fall on your face again, because now it's the ego co-opts what you just did and then makes you feel like you're actually free.
Razor's edge.
And then you go and then you falter again, and then you're like, oh my god, but I thought I was free. And then you feel terribly, like you feel really terrible about yourself, which is why I use the word striving. And in the zone of striving is when you're the safest, because otherwise you are, while there is a desire to be free, it's paradoxical. When you arrive at freedom, you're not like, okay, now I'm done. When you arrive at freedom, you lose the discomfort. You almost like you enjoy the striving. You see the paradoxical nature of it. You just feel like this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, is just continue striving, because that's
I'm striving to enjoy the striving. It's a tall order.
And that's the true freedom here, because when you arrive at that place, you're no longer thinking oh yes, I'm free now, and I've become free of. You're just like, well, this is the work that I need to keep doing all the time, and that's the zone that I need to live in, is just constantly trying. And that's something, again, I bring this up because it's paradoxical, and that's what we have to look for in our life, is that relentless responsibility, is getting to that place of constant.
This is also the idea that you hear in 12-step groups like AA, and which our teachers Don and Russ at the Enneagram Institute speak about, and which is very, very much in my heart and mind. And I've been, constantly meditating on this idea of let go and let God, that, we do our best, but it's really, again, it's not all up to us. And that in and of itself is freeing, because we put so much pressure on myself, even I should say, I put so much pressure on myself, even about the striving. And I miss the fact that, wait a minute, it's not all up to me. Because I personally, I carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I see when I go to my guru, with my struggles, and I try to work through them, the response that I get is just coming from a different plane of consciousness altogether. Dare I say, way beyond even the creative consciousness. It's like, it's a liberated state, right? So the response I always get is like, don't worry. It's not all on you. It's not all up to you. You try your best. But like even in the trying my best, my way of doing it is so clunky and like, okay, I'm going to try my best. Here we go. I'm going to try. And that's not how it works. The let go and let God is that, like, I do my part the best that I can. Even that is faulty. But it's so freeing to know that it's not all on me. And by grace, I will move forward if I'm sincere. And I have deep conviction in this. And I know that, I've been a spiritual practitioner for 14 years now. And I know that the next 14 years are about moving much, much more into that space of like, it's actually, even the striving is not all about me. It's another like very, very subtle, very insidious way that the ego has its hold on us, or on me, I should say again.
There's the word that comes to mind here is, building off of your relentless, Rasanath, is relentless humiliation, just humiliation at all stages, regardless of how well or poorly things are going.
Yeah, Richard Rohr, who's one of our most quoted and really loved authors within Upbuild, he says, I look for one good humiliation every day. And I wish I could say that. I'm not there. I'm actually starting off the day saying, how can I prevent any humiliation from happening today? And it just shows a different perspective. It shows that I have relinquished control and have accepted my humanity, in the sense that my fragile ego will be humiliated. And it's powerful. So it moves me to tears when I think about that. And to not defend that, but to embrace that, for us, that's the intersection of the psychological work that we do and the spiritual work. That is the corridor, because without the spiritual work, that transformation of consciousness, where we look at not defending the ego, but to actually work and engage it despite its shortcomings, but also, it will be humiliated. It will feel the humiliation. And I'm not trying to protect my day from not being humiliated. I strive to actually be sincere and do my best. And then also realize that the fragile nature of the ego is that it's going to be humiliated. It's going to feel discomfort. It's going to always look for causes to blame, people to blame. And that is not a good feeling, but it's going to happen. And I want to look for, I'm trying to look for those moments in my life and ask for help. And ask for help to go beyond that. And that's a big part, that is in big part the spiritual work.
You see how deep the controlling goes. It's like, it's even, I want to control the striving, and I want to control the outcomes and the results. And, in our coaching, of course, for me, it's like a conflict always, that I'm here getting coaching and I'm giving coaching to others with this idea that like I can plot out the path, or I can help somebody plot out their path. And ultimately, we don't know. I mean, the result is not up to us as coachee or coach. So it's a funny thing, but at the same time, we have to do our best with what is within our control. And it's such a fine line. Talk about razor's edge, because we have to do our part. And at the same time, we have to be detached and recognize it's not all up to us. And the tendency of the ego is, I want to control. I want the results, and I want the results to be up to me. And if I'm going to be happy in my striving, like, it's about my control over the striving. And what I find is so difficult is to move beyond that. As I said, like, that is my focal point now, is to get beyond that control. And I mean, that to me is the essence of it all. To get beyond this necessity to control all the time. And what's heartwarming for me is that I came into this world with the sense of other people have it together. Other people know what's what. And I better be like that. I better shape up, get my act together, and do well in life in all regards. And what's heartwarming is that more and more I'm seeing we're all in this together. Like, whether we're aware of it or not, the struggle of the ego is real for all of us. And so if it's a painful state that you're in, or if you're feeling like you can't get beyond a certain stuckness, which is definitely, I mean, I'm going through that myself. It's good to know that you're not alone. Like, it's not just this world of everybody like doing well and like, yeah, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, but it's a world of people who are struggling and I would even say suffering with all of this same stuff. And our hope is that we can get the help to alleviate our suffering, to get beyond our struggles, and to then give back, to share that with others. To me, that gives me so much purpose and motivation and excitement when I see that it works, it is working, it is happening, and we really are in this together.
I very deeply believe that, especially at this time, in this country, but also around the world, what we are experiencing is very clearly the direct result of the ego. And dare I also say that even as we try to change and reform things, we have to be so careful about the ego co-opting how we are approaching it. It can so easily, even as it looks good and right, it can so easily be coming from a place of the ego. And if we don't pay close attention to it, this is something that one of my mentors always says, that if you are correcting somebody, you have to be working twice as hard on yourself. That's the measurement of your qualification to actually step into reform. And many times, the act of reform can be an externalization. It's easier. It's a substitution for the work that I need to do on myself. Is that I go outside and correct the world, and that may seem like it's working in the short term, but it will only give rise to the same thing that existed before the reform started, just in a different way.
That's always one of the things that I most appreciated when I joined Upbuild, was the policy that everyone who is a coach gets coaching themselves. And I didn't quite fully get it at the time, but now, having been ingrained in the organization, now I see the importance of it. And so I want to thank you both for implementing that policy and for so strongly believing in the need for growth, because I think we'd be lost without it, honestly.
Incredible.
It was ingrained in us by the teachers that we learned from. So, and at the same time, we had the same experience. I personally did not realize its gravity and its benefits as I do now. That even as we strive to change things around us or help others, that we never stop taking help.
We always need it.
We always need it.
From one place to another, we always need help, and we always need accountability. It cannot be in a vacuum, and it cannot be like loosey-goosey. It has to be for real. We have to show that we really want to take the steps and we want to move forward.
And that's our urge, and that's the importance of the topic. That's feel the calling to step out and make a change to the world. Let's not give up on working even more harder on personal reform, on really working on the ego, because that is the sense of responsibility. If we have to be torchbearers for change, that is the responsibility that we have to carry, is the responsibility of personal change and constantly striving to work on that ego.
I mean, it's It's so common. I often give the example of the helping professions, that you see people are in it to fix the problems outside of themselves, right? Because it's a lot easier to fix stuff outside of you than inside of you. And so we have to be so vigilant, so aware of that controlling tendency to get the satisfaction of trying to help other people and essentially trying to be above help ourselves, or to be reactive, not aware of the reason why I'm seeking to help other people. And when we're so much in need, and to actually do anything good for the world, it always starts with us. Charity begins at home, right? The popular analogy of put the oxygen mask on first before you try to put it on anybody else. It's critical. And as Gandhi put it, which we hear a lot, be the change you wish to see. Be the change you wish to see. It starts with us. When are we going to get serious? If we want to see the world get serious about life, respecting each other, and living in a healthy, fulfilling, and beneficial way, what are we willing to do to make that happen for ourselves and the people in our sphere of influence? That's what's going to change the world.
That feels like a very good place to close. So thank you guys for your insights and for sharing all that you shared, and for being partners alongside me in this journey of, you know, as Ram Dass said, walking each other home. And I feel like that's exactly what we're doing.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. Pleasure. It's really a pleasure.